Okay, and good morning again. Um, so I'm hoping that by the first of next year, we're going to do a little shift here. We're going to stop recording things and we'll have more open discussion and I'll share shorter, but I'm trying to finish up our work in God's voice within. And I have to say, this Jesuit stuff has just confirmed for me a lot of things that just make my life feel better than my life ever has. I feel I'm living closer to God's purpose for my life, and I'm just plain enjoying my life more than, in spite of the aches and pains and the infirmities that come with having walked around for a long time. Um, One of the things that Ignatius does in the spiritual exercises, which you may remember, there are 370 different what they call annotations, so you can find your way among the different translations of the exercises. You can compare different translations, different interpretations. And so out of 370, the principle and foundation is in the first 20. And the principle and foundation, we read it earlier, is that if I will trust, love, and serve my Creator, that's how I save my soul, which means do the work my soul came here to do. So for me, the principle and foundation in the big book, because every this we're all members of the fellowship, and we're I'm trying to relate. I just get a big charge out of relating these ancient words to our work in AA. So for me, the two statements of um, principle and foundation, or you could say primary purpose, for me are the last page before the stories, page 164, and then also page 68. And those foundational statements for me are: you see to it that your relationship with God is right, and your life is going to feel like a blessing. You're going to have a good time, and I'll read it. See to it that your relationship with God is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us, and great fact is capitalized. So I don't know, if you're saying what is the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to say this is all about us, seeing to it that our relationship with God is right. And it was a Oxford group foundational thing, that the first task was establishing this relationship with a power greater than the mind and greater than the body, greater than human power. And the second task was, through two-way prayer or through whatever technique you used, to ask God for guidance for your life about specific situations or broad general situations, and then to act on that guidance. Faith without works is another foundational principle for us. It's not enough to understand what your life is all about. We've got to put that understanding into effective action. Um, and then the thing tells us how to do it. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to God and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. The only thing that leaves out there is prayer and meditation. But I think that the case I'm going to try to make is, how do I abandon myself to God? Well, I do that by turning away from my self reliance, turning away from the ego's voice, and trying to be open to hear what God wants me to do with my life. And that means prayer and meditation. Oftentimes, you will hear people say, we do steps 1 through 9 to get ourselves in the position to live in 10, 11, and 12. And 10 is the preparation of the mind to be able to enter into prayer and meditation effectively. And prayer and meditation, the way I've been taught, was prayer is me taking my thing to God, and meditation is me listening for an answer. And the fact is, I can't get guidance or I can't get an answer when my mind is consumed with its own self-interest. Um, when I'm consumed consciously or often unconsciously with my resentments and my fears and my sense of remorse, which is feeling bad about me and the life I've lived. And the solution for that is working our way through resentments, praying for the removal of fear and asking for redirection, and then making amends if we're feeling bad about ourselves and the life that we've lived. We're taught to make amends, which is a fundamental Christian thing. It's called penance normally, but we call it amends, which is also to change, which is also, I'm trying to say, um, steps 4 and 5 are the admission of my insanity. Steps 6 and 7 are me praying God to restore me to sanity in relation to how it's useful to God and to my fellows. And steps 8 and 9 are the actual restoration, at least for me. This is where I get restored to sanity by going to people that I don't feel good about my interaction with them around something. And this can happen with people that are no longer here just as effectively as people that are here. But I'm declaring that I don't feel good about my behavior, and I'm saying this is what I'm doing about it. This is the way and a lot of people will say in the end, everything is a living amend. It may be specifically geared toward that person, a behavior, but in the end, it's all living amends. And I'm saying that's me living in 10, 11, and 12 as much as I'm able. So the other, for me, foundational promise is in the middle of page 68. And I think that Bill Wilson and our founding people and our pre-founders are okay with me changing any words I want to change. I don't find it anywhere in the book where it says, nope, this is the way it's written. You got to say it this way, or this isn't going to work for you. That's not part of our deal. So the statement, the book says it is, well, it starts with, where perhaps there's a better way. We think so. We're now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role God assigns. That's a huge, am I in this world to play the role God assigns? I can tell you, I think I'm over 50%. I think I'm more trying to do that than play the role I designed. But it's been a constant, for me, challenge. Um, just to the extent that we do as we think God would have us and humbly rely on Him, does God enable us to match calamity with serenity? So I like to re-say it because I think the humble reliance comes before the action. So I'm going to say, just to the extent that I humbly rely on God, and just to the extent that I live the life I think God wants me to live, I will be able to meet the calamity or match the calamity, the human calamity, with spiritual serenity. Um, Never says the calamity is going to stop. What it says is I'm going to be able to meet it or match it with serenity, which is a sense of okayness or a sense of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love, which I think all come from the Spirit. They don't come from my human nature. So then that immediately takes me to, well, if they're saying just to the extent that I humbly rely on God and just to the extent that I live the life God wants me to live, I will experience serenity, which Ignatius calls faith, hope, and love. What I get, the markers of being in consolation. Then the opposite. Then if I'm not experiencing faith, hope, and love, if I'm not experiencing patience, tolerance, kindness, and love, which of those two things am I not doing? I'm either not humbly relying on God, or I'm not living the way I think God wants me to live, or both. Um, so, so for me, the most challenging part of that formula is humbly rely. And the question is, how do I humbly rely? And I think for me, that means abandoning my sense of a human self and all the things that my human self wants, and claims it needs. Um, what's that saying you hear sometimes? You won't understand that God is all you need until God is all you got. Yeah, I think it's something like that. We don't get that till we've lost everything. And I was saying earlier, I'm reading this Oswald Chambers interpretation of the story of Job, and this is 4,000 years ago, and Job loses everything overnight, and his friends are trying to give him his advice, and they're all operating on, well, this is punishment. You're doing something wrong, Job, but Job was a righteous dude. He was living a good life, and it just brings up the whole. We had a 12-year-old kid killed by a school bus on Thursday or Friday, and it's just these totally unexplained, seems like unnecessary. I mean, I get it obviously with Ukraine, but anyway, okay. So humble reliance is the key, at least is the key for me. And how do I humbly rely? And I'm saying that step 10, when I'm dealing with my internal restless, irritable discontent, my resentment, my dishonesty, my selfishness, my fear, I'm told pray at once for removal, share with somebody, make amends if called for, turn your mind to the question, God, how can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. If you want a formula for humble reliance, it's right there. The question, God, how can I best serve thee? Thy will, not my human will, be done. That's what I'm here for. And then finally, what I get out of asking, what do you want me to do? Or show me the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. Show me how I can best serve you right here, right now. And then what we do, we carry out in 12. So the question, the issue is humble reliance and action. What am I to do? Which is a question that has plagued me all of my life. And where Ignatius fits into this thing is this whole idea of discernment, and that is for me to discern essentially what step 11 is calling for, praying only for knowledge of your will for me. That means what is your purpose for my life. And that's a very challenging thing for complicated, complex, very intellectual human beings to address. And where I just get inspired is seeing this Spaniard 500 years ago lay this stuff out in a way that just blows my mind. That his insight into now, one of the things I've had to do personally is Ignatius is about God and the devil or Satan, and I've had to pitch that to myself as more my human nature and my spiritual nature. I'm convinced for me, it may not work for you. My human nature wants to feel good all the time, doesn't want any discomfort, wants to be a happy camper, wants to live forever. And so the specter of a human death creates a problem. I want self-preservation, self-gratification, self-justification. I want to mentally justify my self-centered, selfish behavior. I think that's what Ignatius is talking about when he brings up the bad spirit, the evil spirit. I don't want to judge it. It's just what it is. Life on life's terms means that I can live with my self-centered, frightened, and selfish ego effectively. That I can live with it and still do God's will for me. Because if I'm hung up, particularly when I think it all reduces to fear. I think of the startling thing about resentment is discovering that it's not about resentment, it's about my fear about what the consequences of the other person's behavior and how they make me feel. Fear is about fear, obviously. Remorse, I believe, is anticipated. What I'm fearing is I'm going to get punished. If I don't behave well, I'm anticipating the punishment that's going to come as a result of it. So, at any rate, so we've in this series. This is number 30 of these things that we've recorded, where we're looking at the whole Ignatius thing. We've gone through his story. We've gone through a good bit of the spiritual exercises. We took a detour into purpose-driven life. And now we are at the end of the spiritual exercises and the rules for discernment. It's very parallel to our spiritual appendix. It comes after the end of the last exercise is the contemplation to attain divine love, and then it moves into supplementary material, and these rules for discernment are supplementary material. So, so what I didn't discover till I think it was Friday is that I've already written up these rules for discernment, and so I did email it to you, a PDF, and hoping that you may have printed pages 12 through whatever it was. Because these are a version of the rules for discernment, and it's what I'm going to work off. And and if you don't have that, the other way you could get at it, if you want, is God's Voice Within. You can find it in the table of contents because it's going to be. Let's see, the last thing, it starts on page 223, primary text of Ignatius's Rules for Discernment of Spirits. This is a translation, a translation of those rules for discernment. So, first thing of interest is that Ignatius divides these rules for discernment into 2 different weeks. And I think I said before with alcoholics, rules is not a great word. And instead of rules for discernment, if you would like to say to yourself, guidelines for decision making, maybe your ego will take to that better than rules for discernment. Rules for discernment sounds pretty heavy. He divides them into the first 14 are, he says, more suitable to the first week. And he's talking about the first week of the spiritual exercises. And you may remember that they aren't weeks in terms of 7 days. It was just his way of saying the periods of the or different areas of the exercises that it's trying to address. And the the first week is one that includes the primary purpose, something called the Ignatian Examen, and a lot of stuff about penance. The second week, which the second set of rules are aimed at, is more about Jesus's life up to the Last Supper. The third week's about the Last Supper and the crucifixion, and the fourth week is about the resurrection and ends with that contemplation to attain divine love. So the second week, it's the incarnation, the nativity, and his early life up to Palm Sunday. I wish he'd just laid out um, 14 and 8, 22 rules and just numbered them that way. It'd be easier for us but we're just going to march through them. We're going to go through the first week, the 14 rules, and it'll probably be the next time we meet that we'll do the second week. So this is a translation of this stuff. 313, annotation 313 is the sets it off. So I'm just going to read it to you. Rules by which to perceive and understand to some extent. This is, I love his language. The way he does it is stiff and formal, and I've tried to make it a little bit easier. But to understand to some extent, this is wonderful because he's saying, to some extent, this is going to help you understand what's going on. The various movements produced in the soul. Now, movements produced in the soul are these deep feelings of either faith, hope, and love, or doubt, fear, and despair, in order that we should accept the good and reject the bad. So, this lines right up with our prayer for removal when we're judging it as, I wouldn't say bad, but I would say doesn't make us feel good. We have a prayer for removal. Please remove this and direct my attention to what you would have me be. In order that we accept the good and reject the bad, these first 14 rules more suitable to the first week, where we look at our personal sin, our rejection of God's love in favor of human power, and the sins of the world. 314, rule number 1. With those of us who go from one sin to another, so what if you sometimes you have to go to rule 2 to understand this. So these are 2 different rules, and he's talking about people that are stuck in their way of life, and they're just going from one sin to another. They're not making spiritual progress. Rule 2 says, for those of us who are making spiritual progress, this is the interesting thing to me. So I'll read it first. So, with those of us who go from one sin to another, the self-centered and selfish human ego holds out apparent pleasures, imagined sensual delights and satisfactions, so that we remain stuck in sin and powerless over our own insanity. The good spirit, the inherent nature of the soul, on the other hand, takes the opposite approach, causing pricks of conscience and feelings of remorse, using its natural power of rational moral judgment. So, what it's saying, when we're stuck under the influence of our human egos, it moves to fantasy, and it moves to just getting us to imagine all these wonderful things that are going to happen if we go after whatever it's projecting we go after. But when it's the good spirit, it's going to jab us a little bit. So one example of this in the big book is when Jim, the car salesman, he's sitting at that roadside cafe, and suddenly the thought crosses his mind that if I put my whiskey into milk and have it on a full stomach, I'm gonna it's gonna go well. He even says the experiment went so well, I had another, and then another, and then another, and then he's off to the asylum again. But there's a moment when he says, I vaguely sensed I wasn't being any too smart. This is the good spirit or the nature of the soul or something jabbing him a little bit, saying, "Oh, please, Jim, no, don't do that." You get a little bit of a jolt there. So he's just trying to tip us off as to how we can discern what's coming from God and what's coming um, from the human ego. Uh, any of you that have done that workshop, the big book workshop, when we're in step 11, one of the things we do is read 4 pages from How to Listen to God, the 4-page pamphlet, How to Listen to God. And their method of discernment is when you're seeking God's guidance around whatever, you just write down everything that flows through your mind. You're not trying to discern what's coming from God and what's coming from my ego. You don't, because it'll stop the flow of it. You just write it all down. When you, and then you go over it, particularly with another person who's trying to live to a prayer, and you're applying the 4 absolutes: the absolute purity, absolute honesty, absolute unselfishness, absolute love, to help you distinguish what's coming from God, what's coming from the Spirit. So these first 2 rules are trying to tip you off to how this stuff shows up. Annotation 315, rule number 2. For those of us who are making progress in relief from the bondage of self, I'm throwing in our AA stuff, and who are advancing in God's service and praise, the procedure is just the opposite. So isn't that interesting that so this is, I am making progress. The bad selfish spirit, the human ego, harasses, saddens, obstructs, and disturbs us with false reasoning, which is what we call self-justification, so as to impede our progress. The good spirit does the opposite. The good spirit, the nature of the soul, encourages, strengthens, consoles, inspires with peace, making things easy and removing all obstacles with a feeling of effortless flow so that we may move forward in the doing of good. I'm telling you this, I just think I find him inspiring that he laid this stuff all out a long way before there was even such a thing as human psychology. All right, turning the page. You've heard this stuff before. What he's going to do in the next 2 rules, Rule 3 and Rule 4, is define desolation and consolation. Um, Consolation means any interior movement produced in the soul which inspires us with love and gratitude toward God. As a consequence, we love all things of creation as they express the grace of God. Consolation leads to love of God, whether arising from grief over sins, grief over Christ's passion, or because of any other actions directed toward God's service and praise. Consolation increases our feelings of faith, hope, and charity love, and all interior happiness which calls us to heavenly things and toward the salvation of our soul. Consolation leaves the soul quiet and at peace with God. So, um, so I'm gonna pitch this a little bit differently. Um, I think that I will experience serenity, whatever that means to you, because I think we get our own conception of serenity the way we get our own conception of everything. And with me, my deepest experience of serenity, I've mentioned this before, was sitting in a church basement with a dozen of my AA associates, and um, I didn't need anything to be different than it was. I was accepting life on life's terms. I didn't need it to be hotter or colder. brighter or dimmer. I didn't need anybody to be different. It was astounding. and I never experienced it so far. I don't know how long ago this was, but I always need something's got to be a little bit different. And my ego tells me something's got to be different here than it already is. But I am a devotee of this thing, and life on life's terms means to me life as it's showing up. I can't demand that it be different than the way it's showing up. And it doesn't matter whether it's something to do with my body or my mind, or something to do with your body and your mind, or something to do with the US government or the town of Camden. It's just, I mean, I may be guided to do something about it, to not fight, but to try to talk about a different way or whatever. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to try to be helpful, but it means I don't fight what's showing up. And I'm sure I've said, the heart of the I learned so much from this really 2 to 3 year period of going into the deepest depression of my life and coming out of it. In terms of when I was fighting it, it just made it worse. When I was fighting it, as opposed to asking God to restore me to sanity, when I was fighting it with human power, it just got worse, and I got more and more frightened and hopeless and all of that stuff, doubt and fear and despair. So for me, the key thing here is that I'm humbly relying, that I understand the difference between humble reliance and ego reliance or self-reliance. I am going to God. I love the set aside prayer. It's set aside everything I think I know, so I can come to you with an open mind and a new experience. And I'm going to try to find this. There's a beautiful lesson from a Course in Miracles that says, "Forget this world, forget this course." Is like saying, forget the big book, forget the traditions, and come with wholly empty hands unto your God. You're coming to God with nothing. That I'm no demand. It says, don't tell God how to get to you. Your job is to let God come into your life. um, Reminds me of it's page 62 and 63. This is before the third step prayer. First of all, we have to quit playing God. You want to know how to humbly rely on God? Well, quit playing God. When you're playing God, you can't humbly rely. It brings up the question, how do I play God? Just like the fear page 68 says, we don't apologize for God. How do I apologize for God? I apologize for God when I want anything to be different than it already is. I'm saying, you messed up here, God. This person is really insane. You messed up. And I'm going to try to correct the insanity by throwing them a lot of ill will, and maybe they'll see the error of their ways and act differently. Positive power of resentment. So, at any rate, first of all, we got to quit playing God, and then it throws in this little line. Why? Because it doesn't work. It's not that it's wrong. It doesn't say that. It is wrong, but we got to quit playing God because it doesn't work. Next, we have to invite God into our lives, and we have to invite God into relationship with us. And we're given these 4 different relationships, but you get any relationship you want. The first relationship is director actor, if we're into life as a drama. Second relationship is principal agent, if we're into business. Third one is parent child, and the fourth one is friend. It says this startling thing. just as much as the feeling that we have for a friend. It's earlier in We Agnostics. Wow. God is a friend as opposed to God as a judgmental, punishing power. God is a friend. Um, wow. What's a friend mean? What do I, a friend has a friend I easily communicate with, a friend I can say anything and they're not gonna react negatively. A friend has my back. We often say that. A friend has my best interests in their heart. They want what's best for me, just the way I want what's best for them. Um, and then at any rate, we invite God into relationship in order to see to it that my relationship with God is right. Um, and then what's the next part? I got to do as I'm directed to do. Quit playing God, invite God in, do as directed. If you wanted even fewer words, pause, ask and listen, do. The pause is step 10. The asking and listening is step 11. The doing is step 12, because we already said faith without works is dead. So this is a little bit different. He's saying when consolation, he's defining consolation. And I'm saying if you want consolation, I think the big book is saying if you want consolation, one, humbly rely on God. Figure out what that means for you and how you don't humbly rely on God. And two, behave the way you think God wants you to behave. You do those two things, and consolation is going to show up. Now, later on in these rules, he's going to throw in a couple other little ideas that it's basically our only two alternatives, if you want to go to that thing, are consolation, desolation. But there is something called false consolation, which is actually like a manic state, and it's powered by the human ego. It's not powered by our relationship with God. It's actually a form of desolation. And then there's something called difficult consolation, which is where it doesn't feel good. We're really quite uncomfortable, but we have a sense, and I think this is what amends does. You get amends are uncomfortable, but somehow we know on a deeper level this is how we're getting restored to sanity. This is worth doing. Um, Consolation, desolation, false consolation, difficult consolation, and then finally the fifth one, which is going to show up in the second week, is called consolation without previous cause. We call it in AA, we call it a God shot. And the marker of consolation without previous cause is it's beyond our ability to doubt. What a beautiful thing. Beyond I don't doubt this is a result of my relationship with God. So anyway, and the marker of consolation at the end of that one is consolation leaves the soul quiet and at peace with God. Um, Number 317, rule number 4 of the first week, desolation. Desolation is the opposite of consolation. Desolation refers to darkness and disturbance of the soul, attraction to what is low and of the earth. What a nice way to say that. And disquiet arising from various agitations and temptations, in parentheses, restless, irritable, discontent. Remember, restless in the body, irritable in the mind, discontent in the spirit. That's Silkworth saying that. Let's see. All this leads to lack of confidence. Now remember, confidence means with faith, right? CON is the with, and fidelity, um, faith. Lack of confidence where we feel ourselves in fear, without hope, and we feel a lack of love. And here's some markers. We find ourselves thoroughly lazy, lukewarm, depressed, as though cut off from our Creator and Lord. And I put in parentheses, uninspired. Just as consolation is contrary to desolation, so the thoughts that spring from consolation are contrary to the thoughts that spring from desolation. Desolation, in parentheses, feelings of doubt and fear and despair that come from being out of sync with God's purpose for our lives. So, we were talking before we started, and a couple of us were claiming to feel pretty good. and and I know for me, when I do feel I am trying to humbly rely on God, and I am trying to live the life that my Creator wants me to live here. I feel as good as I've ever felt. Um, so, okay, turning the page, and going to try to get a couple of more done before we stop. 318, rule number 5. In times of desolation, we should not make any big dramatic decisions or changes, but should stand firm and constant in our spiritual practices that we are guided to before we went into the current desolation. Just as when in consolation, God's nature is guiding us, so too in desolation, it is the selfish, frightened human ego that is calling the shots, and by following the ego's counsel, we shall never find the right way forward. Um, Rule number 6, while in desolation, we should not make any big changes in former good decisions, and we should act against the ego's selfish guidance by increasing our prayer and meditation practice. Step 11, the daily examine, which is step 10 in my mind, or our acts of penance, step 9, and service, step 12. So this takes you back to the first part of God's voice within, where he does a lot of defining of desolation and consolation, and it's really about, once you've first, part 1, he defines desolation and consolation. Part 2, he tells you what to do when you find yourself in desolation. Here's what to do. When you find yourself in consolation, here's what to do. What fascinates me about Ignatius, he gives you 8 things to do when you're in desolation, and he gives you 4 things to do when you're in consolation. And we're going to be coming across them, and they come from these rules for discernment. So when you're in desolation, we'll be going through these things next time. You do this, this, and this, which is all stuff that we do in AA. It's all grounded in AA. When you're in consolation, the gist of it is prepare yourself for the next desolation. I love that. It's not like cheerleader for God. It's like, okay, now that you're feeling good, this is a good time to look back. And there's a moment when he calls it the serpent's tail. Look back and see how the ego started off with a good idea, and it dragged you down the rabbit hole into what turns out to not be a good idea. So both rules 5 and 6, the first one is saying, don't let up on your spiritual drill. This is what step 10 says. Continue, 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 continue. Continue doing this stuff. Don't let up. Don't get complacent. Um, and the second one is just offering one of these things to do in when you are in desolation, which is to act against, you deliberately go against the guidance that you're getting from the human ego. um, I'm going to stop there just because the time always goes too fast. um, I love this stuff, and I really appreciate your presence. I just know I wouldn't be digging into this stuff as much as I am, because, any rate, I really appreciate your being here, and I'm going to gong this gong, and I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we're going to have some open discussion.